Welcome to Standard 6F. Congratulations, you've reached the end of Standard 6, the longest standard in the course. I'm sure by now you've probably started wondering if you'd ever see the end of this standard. Here we are at the end now. In this presentation, we hope to describe the expansion or the spread of a number of different cultural things, of arts, philosophy, literature, and even some new technologies during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. This is a big period of time. We're looking over 300 years here, all of the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s, and a number of different areas. So let's go ahead and see what the essential question is that we're hoping to answer in this presentation. We actually have two for 6F. Our first essential question is, who were some of the composers, artists, philosophers, and writers of this time period that we're looking at? Composers are people who write music, and philosophers are people who come up with new ways of thinking. They challenge the existing way of thinking and bring up new ideas. Okay, our first piece of essential understanding, it's a little bit of a no-brainer. It says that the 16th, 17th, and 18th century brought about many changes in these areas. Again, we're looking at 300 years, so it only makes sense that there would be quite a bit of change in art and literature and philosophy. Okay, our essential knowledge, our first piece of essential knowledge is we want to know these composers, artists, philosophers, and writers. We want to know who they are and a little bit about them. Okay, the first two people we need to know in 6F are two composers. The first is a composer named Johann Sebastian Bach. And Bach was a composer during a musical period known as the Baroque. I often tell students when we teach this in class to link the letters B. Okay, we got the B for his last name Bach, and B for the period of time that he composed music, the Baroque. So we'll take a listen here to two pieces of Bach's music. You might be thinking there's no way you know any of Bach's music. This isn't your kind of music. I guarantee that within 3 or 4 notes you would recognize this piece of music here. I feel like I should be looking for Dracula entering the room. Okay, so this is Bach, and we get a sense from this piece here that the Baroque relied heavily on the organ. The organ was the main instrument for Baroque composers. It's why it's often called church music or sometimes the heavy metal of the time. Okay, we'll take another listen to another piece here. A piece of music you might be familiar with from commercials or from movies or TV shows. The second composer we need to know is a guy named Mozart, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And Mozart composes a little bit after Bach in a period known as the classical. Okay, and again, you might be thinking you don't know any of Mozart's music. We'll take a listen to two pieces. Okay, a little bit lighter, the music of Mozart and the classical than the Baroque music. Okay, and another example of Mozart's music. Again, a piece of music you might not have known was Mozart, but chances are you're familiar with the piece of music. Okay, these guys, their music is really just such a part of culture and society, even today, hundreds of years after they're gone. Okay, Voltaire strangely makes a second appearance here. We saw Voltaire first in Standard 6D along with the other Enlightenment philosophers. I've never quite understood why he comes back again here in this one, but he does. So we want to make sure we know Voltaire again, a philosopher with strong opinions about separating church and state, keeping politics and religion out of each other's way, and freedom of speech. Again, in a day and age where absolute rulers were the norm and people ended up in prison and jail for speaking out against the ruler, Voltaire was proposing a different way. Okay, so we see Voltaire's ideas expressed in these pictures, the idea of church going one way, state going the other way. Voltaire would not be a big fan of what we see in the political cartoon, having religious leaders as judges, say, on the Supreme Court. That would be an example of what Voltaire was saying, trying to keep those two things separate. Okay, we also see examples of freedom of speech, the right of people to stand up and speak their minds about the government without fear of harassment or imprisonment. The type of speech Martin Luther King, for example, what was noted for. Okay, we have a writer, a Spanish novelist named Miguel Cervantes. And Cervantes is noted for writing the world's first novel. Novels are the types of books you read for entertainment, for enjoyment, not the books you read like a textbook, and not religious books. You typically had religious books and you had textbooks before Cervantes. But as people had more free time, people were becoming a little more educated, they had time and interest to read things other than religious books and textbooks. And modern examples of novels, things like Harry Potter, things like The Hunger Games, these are stories people read for the enjoyment of the story, not for any particular knowledge. Okay, so Don Quixote tells the story of the title character, Don Quixote. His first name isn't Don, Don being a title of respect, and his neighbor Sancho Panza. Don Quixote thinks he falls in love with a younger woman named Dulcinea, and in order to prove his love, he feels the need to go out and, like a knight of old times, defeat all sorts of enemies and monsters. The famous scene in Don Quixote, he mistakes a windmill for one of these monsters, and he goes charging at it on his horse. His sword gets caught up in the windmill, and he ends up spinning around on the blades of the windmill. It's the type of story that today we see in movies. Anytime you watch a movie, typically it's two guys get in the car, maybe they're driving cross country, and all sorts of crazy events happen. That's basically Don Quixote. That's the legacy of Cervantes. Okay, and the last person we need to know here was a French painter named Eugene Delacroix. And Delacroix paints during a period of art known as the Romantic period or the Romantic school. It's not that Delacroix and the Romantic painters are painting people hugging and kissing. It's not romantic in that sense. It's romantic in the sense that, unlike the Renaissance artists who wanted to get things very realistic, the Romantic artists were more interested in capturing the feeling of the moment. Delacroix painted the painting on the left, Liberty leading the people. The woman in the yellow dress is Liberty. She's not really there as a person. She represents the feeling of liberty that was there at this street riot that he was painting. The painting on the right is another Delacroix. This is the death of Desdemona, who was the wife of Othello in Shakespeare's play Othello. Notice we don't even see the faces on the people in the painting. It wasn't like he was trying to capture the moment of death the way it looked. He was trying to capture it the way it felt. And that's what distinguished the Romantic painters. Okay, the second part of 6F, our second essential question, has to do with the technologies and new institutions that developed during this period of time and how they were important to European economies. Okay, so we have here again the idea that the age of reason, this time period, is going to witness or see many inventions, new technologies and innovations, ways of doing things that are going to stimulate or increase trade and transportation during this period. Okay, so we have three new technologies that we want to know. The first was all-weather roads. The guy you see here was a Scottish engineer named John McAdam. And for the most part, after the Romans in Europe, roads really kind of deteriorated. By the 15, 16, and into the 1700s, roads frequently were just dirt pathways. And when it rained or when it snowed, and these paths, these roads got wet and muddy, and many times you couldn't use them. All-weather roads were roads that you could use all year round. McAdam came up with a process of mixing sand and rock and gravel together, applying it in an even fashion to the roadbed, and those roads held up regardless of the weather. As a result, transportation and trade are going to be greatly improved. Okay, we also had during this period of time an agricultural revolution. We see new designs in farm tools and farming techniques. These are going to result in more food, increased productivity, and that helps to lead to a growing population. We see here an American inventor, a guy named John Deere. You might be familiar with the green and yellow tractors. John Deere actually is famous for inventing the steel plow, a plow made out of steel, which was much more durable and able to plow fields much more efficiently. We also have an English guy named Charles Townsend who comes up with a method of what we call four-field crop rotation. Those of you who know anything about gardening or about plants, there's certain plants, certain crops that drain all the nutrients and all the good things out of the soil, and then there's plants and crops that replenish those things. For Townsend, the idea was to not plant the same crop in the same field every single year, to rotate, move the crops around the fields, and this way the process of crops taking and replenishing nutrients from the soil would balance out, and the soil was much more productive and could be used much longer. Okay, we also had another English guy, a guy named Jethro Tull, who came up with an invention called the seed drill. And the seed drill, instead of spreading the seeds out on the top of the soil where the wind could blow them away or birds could swoop in and eat them, the seed drill put the seed directly into the soil and reduced the waste and made farming much more efficient. And then the last piece of technology, the last improvement, were improvements in ship designs during this time. The ship on the top that you're looking at is a design called what's called the clipper ship. And clipper ships were designed to be very fast over long distances. The ship on the bottom was a steamship, which obviously using a steam engine, not relying just on the wind, could travel regardless of the wind patterns and also help to improve speeds. Both of these things are going to lower the cost of transporting goods, and that ends Standard 6F.